Have you ever wondered what it really takes to succeed when it feels like everything is stacked against you? Well, today we're going on a journey to rural Rajasthan in India, and this is a story about facing some pretty tough realities, for sure. But more importantly, it's about finding that universal spirit of perseverance that can turn incredible hardship into an amazing triumph.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the real data to get a feel for the challenges on the ground. Then we're going to meet some absolutely incredible people who are just defying those odds. After that, we'll dive into a powerful story that kind of captures the soul of this whole struggle. And then we'll wrap it all up by figuring out the real secret to their success.
So let's just start with this big question. I mean, it's something every single one of us faces, right? In one way or another. So as we go through this, maybe think about the challenges in your own life and what it really truly takes to push through them.
All right, let's get specific. We're starting in a place called Chinod village, which is in the Pali district of Rajasthan. Because, to really understand the victories that came later, we've got to first understand the battlefield.
Okay, so if you look at the census data from 2011, you'll see Chinod's overall literacy rate is almost 8 points lower than the state average. But honestly, the real story isn't in that top number. It's what you find when you dig a little deeper into the comparison. And here it is. This is the heart of the challenge. I mean, just look at that massive gap. In Chinod, literacy for men is over 74%, but for women, it just drops off a cliff, all the way down to 44%. That is a 30-point difference. It's staggering, and it points to some really deep-rooted barriers that are stopping girls from getting an education. So why is this happening? Well, research from the area shows it's this whole tangled web of issues. You've got these cultural norms where girls are sometimes seen as pariah dan, which basically means someone else's wealth, like they're just being raised for another family. And that thinking leads to things like early marriage, pressure to save for a dowry instead of paying for school, and then, on top of all that, a real lack of safe schools with female teachers, which is, a huge deal for parents.
But look, numbers and barriers, they only tell one side of the story, right? They don't capture the spirit of the people. So now we're going to meet the trailblazers, the people who looked at these exact same challenges and saw not a dead end, but a starting line. This is Ruma Devi, and her story literally begins right where our data left off. She grew up in rural Rajasthan, and yeah, she had to drop out of school in the 8th grade. If you looked at the statistics, you'd think her path was already decided. But she decided, nope, I'm going to write a different story.
So with zero formal backing, she convinced 10 women from her village to all chip in 100 rupees each. And with that tiny amount of money, they bought a single, second-hand stitching machine. That was it. That was the beginning of an empire, all built on shared will and one little machine.
From that one machine and those 10 women to this, 30,000. Let that number sink in for a second. Ruma Devi has built a network that now provides a living for over 30,000 women artisans across the region. It's just incredible proof of how one person's grit can create these massive waves of change.
And her journey is just wow. From a small village group to running a major NGO, from selling in local markets to having her own fashion shows, from being a determined artisan to getting India's highest civilian honor for women, and even getting invited to speak at Harvard. Think about that. The girl who had to leave school in the 8th grade was now teaching the world.
And what's really cool is she isn't just a one-off. There's a pattern here. You've got Ruma Devi on one side, the artisan who built a movement from the inside, from the ground up. And then you have someone like Tanushree Jain, an entrepreneur from the city who quit her corporate job to start a social enterprise, bringing a totally different perspective. Different backgrounds, different models, but the mission? Exactly the same. Empowerment.
Okay, so beyond the headlines and the famous names, there's another story that really gets to the raw spirit of this journey. And it takes us right back to that village where we started.
This is the story of Raju Bathi from Chinod village. He was born into poverty and knew from a young age that if he didn't do something big, his life would look just like his parents' life of struggle. But here's the thing. His first big attempt, well, it was a failure. People in his village doubted him. Some even told him he'd never make it. But he just refused to believe that failure was the final chapter.
So years later, picture this. He's in a job interview. The manager looks at him and says, "You don't have a fancy degree? You don't have any formal experience? Why on earth should we hire you?" And Raju's answer was so simple, but so powerful. He just said, "I have the experience of hard work, dedication, and struggle, and I never give up."
And you know what? He wasn't just talking. That was his resume, his life. Working in the fields, washing dishes at a tea stall, studying by the dim light of a kerosene lamp when everyone else was asleep. He never complained about his hardships, and he sure didn't let his early failures define him.
He turned it all into fuel. So, what does this all teach us? The data, Ruma Devi's incredible journey, Raju Bhatti's unbreakable spirit. What's the common thread? Let's try and boil it all down to the real secret to success.
It really seems to point to this kind of four-step blueprint. First, confront reality. You have to see the challenges for what they are, but you can't let them become an excuse. Second, cultivate self-belief, like Ruma Devi did with those first 10 women. Third, embrace the struggle. You have to see failure not as the end, but as your best teacher, the way Raju Bhatti used every doubt and every hardship to make himself stronger. And finally, number 4, redefine luck. Luck isn't something you just wait for. It's what happens when all your hard work and preparation finally meet an opportunity.
And this is the ultimate lesson from Raju's story, right? It just sums everything up perfectly. Success isn't about not having problems. It's about having perseverance. Hard work, it has a funny way of making its own luck.
So in the end, what we learn from all this is that our circumstances, they're just the starting point. They are never the final destination. These stories from Rajasthan absolutely prove that, which really just leaves one final, very personal question for you. Knowing this, what challenge will you conquer?